Bueno, pues proseguimos. Arrancábamos ayer con la frase más completa que hace título a estas jornadas, a esta edición de 2023, que decía que un escenario de teatro es uno de los lugares del mundo donde es feliz, y esa es la frase en su totalidad que hemos querido volver a situar para cerrar estas conversaciones de este día y medio aquí en Menorca, en San Luis, en el lugar de los orígenes, y para eso he invitado a tres personalidades de muy distintos ámbitos, pero que sin duda nos van a ofrecer una mirada en torno y una reflexión en torno a ese escenario, tal y como lo describía Camus, como nos ha ido describiendo a cada uno de los invitados también a lo largo de estos días, ¿no? Como ese espacio de los posibles. Así que muchas gracias, Marta Pazos, por acompañarnos y por la defensa de tus obras que podemos disfrutar aquí. Bienvenida. Muchísimas gracias a Mohammad Al Attar, que también, cuya escritura de teatro pues es otra apertura hacia otros lugares del mundo, y a Driss Ksikes por su reflexión siempre y su singularidad y poética, hacernos ver otros espacios de teatro. Os dejo con ellos tres y así cerramos estas jornadas.
Buenos días, qué ilusión estar aquí. Empiezo con un agradecimiento muy profundo a Sandra y a todo su equipo por el cuidado, ¿no? que hay desde cómo generan y cómo la curaduría, ¿no? de este magnífico evento hasta el estar aquí, ¿no? este presente que es tan rico y tan inspirador.
This being here, so enriching and so inspiring. When Sandra gave me this title for this session, a theatre stage is one of the places in the world where I am happy.
Bueno, parecía que estas palabras también salían de mi boca. Como
I had
se
the
dice
feeling
ahora,
that
me
these
representa.
words
Este pensamiento a mí
were coming out of my mouth. This thought actually represents me, as we currently say. And I'm going to talk about the situated knowledge. The topic is the places in the world.
Yo voy a empezar por mi
mundo, and I'm going to start from my world, from my smaller world.
Mi cuerpo es mi
body.
Es mi país.
My
Esta es
body
una
is my
foto
country.
de mi espalda,
Here
es la
you
parte
can
de
see
mí
a
que menos
picture
conozco.
of my
En el momento
back.
que me
This is the
sacaron
part
la
of
foto
myself that I
acababa
know
de
the
salir
less.
del mar y tenía el pelo teñido de
This
naranja.
was just
se puede ver
after I got out from a swim in the sea, and
mi espalda está llena
you see that my
de
back is
lunares.
covered with
En portugués
spots,
la
and
palabra
I have my hair
lunar es sinal,
orange,
señales.
and
Y mi vida se
sinai
podría
is the
dibujar en
French
una
word
línea en la que se van sucediendo señales, lunares, cicatrices. Las señales siempre han venido para mí del desvío de la mirada, de tener visión periférica, de generalmente no estar mirando para
I always try to keep a
centro, sino hacia la
not
periferia,
to try to look to the center, but
generalmente
to the
también estar mirando para un lugar donde los otros y las otras no miraban,
my life is full of marks in that sense. I always try to look to spots where people are not looking to.
En el año
And for me, that means
1994,
being connected. In
mi madre me regaló
1994,
un
my
viaje a
mother
Londres, tengo 18 años, es la primera vez que
offered
cojo
me a
un avión, la
gift.
primera
She
vez
sent me to London.
que
It was a
salgo
trip to
de
London.
España.
It was the first
Y
time
al bajar en la terminal
I was getting out of
Heathrow, todo el mundo
Spain, I
corría
was
con
going
las
abroad.
maletas hacia adelante
I
y
was
yo dirigí
flying
mi
for the
mirada
first
al
time. I
suelo,
was
que estaba
18 years
limpio,
old,
impoluto,
and when
y
we
reparé
arrived to
que había
Heathrow,
un
and
sobre
everyone was
de la
walking
British
really
Airways
fast
de
with their
vomitar.
trolleys, and I
Y
looked
lo
to the
cogí
floor,
porque era
and
un
I saw
sitio
there
muy
was an
limpio y
envelope. It
aquello no
was a
estaba
very clean
ensuciando, y
floor,
cuando voy a
and
tirarlo
this
a la
envelope
papelera
was from
digo,
the
esto
British
está
Airways.
lleno de
So
papeles, lo abro
I was about to throw it into
y
the
al
bin, and then
cambio
I
eran libras
realized
esterlinas
there
y al
were
cambio
things
eran
inside,
alrededor de unos
and
3.000
in
euros de
fact it
ahora.
was about 3,000 3,000 euros.
Yo
It was
viajaba
pounds,
con mi
but
tío, que era 9 años mayor que yo. Mi tío dio el sobre,
we saw the amount,
se
it
lo
was the
guardó
equality to
y me dio
3,000
el
euros.
equivalente al 20%, el resto se lo
I was
quedó
traveling
él.
with my uncle, and he saw what I had found, and he kept it. Kept the money, only gave me 20% out of the total amount. This is my context. This is where I live in Galicia, this region, and during my childhood I was searching for beauty because I was growing in the 80s, and this belongs to the architectonic trend, which is called ugliness, right? And just the idea was you build yourself as you go, and these were my contextual references. Galicia was marked by violence, drug addicts, narco trafficking, drug trafficking, and no internet. I was painting, I loved painting, and she said, okay, you will study Beaux-Arts, but I didn't know what that was, but I really had bad luck because they opened up a faculty of Beaux-Arts in Pontevedra, my city, so I couldn't go away from home. My references, my benchmark were Taschen's books, and this is my first painting during my studies under the influence of Klimt, as you can obviously see. And then for me, studying Beaux-Arts, I felt like I entered a world to which I belonged. It was my tribe, it was my family. I found a way of breaking my mindset of going out of the box. In 1995, that was the second year, and Professor Castro came into class for art history, and he told us that we were going to study the history of art from 1995 back.
¿Se puede cambiar de dirección? ¿Puedes ir hacia otro lado? Me parecía un concepto muy reverente. Y después,
my head exploded. Can you go backwards in the way you study
con los que yo me
things?
podía
I was really
identificar,
shocked. And then I found references with which I could identify myself, because up to that moment I had only gone up to the 20s with Monet and Gasset and other figures that were interesting, but I couldn't find myself in them. And then I discovered the art of action, and for me this was a great bridge for my career in theatre later on. At the time I didn't know that, of course, I wasn't aware of that. I started studying truth and lies in the art of many artists, particularly female artists or some male artists like González
no me he dado cuenta hasta que llevaba como
had recently died from
más de 20 años dedicándome al teatro, y entonces he querido volver sobre mis pasos,
so 20 years
ir a mis
I
orígenes,
worked in
contrarrestar
theater,
un poco
and then I
esta
realized
tiranía
this. So I
de lo original
decided I want to go back
que
to my
tenemos
origins
los
and
artistas, las artistas,
fight against the
y
tyranny
abrazar un
of the
pensamiento
original
que creo
that is so
que viene de
important for the
Daniel
artists, and embrace
Castelao,
what
que es
Daniel
original,
Rodríguez
es el que
Castelao
tiene
said.
origen.
Original is someone who has an origin, has origins. So I went back to my origins. I discovered this in my youth, and my first paintings. You remember the first painting under Klint's influence, an allegory of my first love, me and my boyfriend, and discovering these careers of these female artists that had so much influence in my work. Well, made me think of the legacy, and it made me think about the fact that I come from a land of magic. It's a telluric land. I started observing my grandmother, who did things that for me were very natural, but that were very much connected with what is invisible. This is not referred to, but no one talks about it, but it's on our skin. So I started talking stories, and my paintings started telling stories about this telluric
que se llama Las 9 olas.
History of Galicia related to everything that is related. This painting is has under a title The 9 Waves, and in the beach of La Lanzada I got sand from there because even today during the autumn, if you want to get pregnant, you go there to that beach and you allow the water of the 9 waves to penetrate you under a full moon, and that means this is a fertility ritual and you're supposed to get pregnant after that. And also I was very much worried about my reference. These artists who had developed their careers during the 70s, 80s and 90s, and this is The Revenge by Ana Mendieta, and I must say that I was very impressed by her biography and her relationship with Calandré, and how she died in a very enigmatic way because she was thrown from a skyscraper to the floor.
Volviendo sobre mis pasos, me he dado cuenta cuánto me ha influenciado dibujo de Louis Bourgeois, ¿no? De la mujer
how Louis Bourgeois drawing impacted me. This
de mis obras teatrales siempre aparece alguien que no tiene una cabeza
all my plays there's always someone without a human head. And I think this is coming from that reference.
Segura de,
I am sure,
de eso,
in fact,
¿no?
of that. I'm convinced that's the connection.
De la
the connection with the world of fantasy.
En el 1997 yo me traslado a Barcelona para huir de mi novio, que era el del primer cuadro,
the one in the first painting, you know, the one influenced by Klein. My family didn't have a lot of money, but I got a grant. And in 1997, in September, I was in the hall of the Faculty of Beaux-Arts in Barcelona, and I decided to go back home. But then I saw through the windows that the sun was shining, and then I thought I'll go out through the gardens. It's a longer way, but it's more beautiful. So I turned around and I see something on the floor, a paper on the floor. So I go and pick it up because I wanted to throw it to the bin. And when I picked it up, it was just some information about La Fura del Vaus, which is a very famous Catalonian theatre group, and it was a flyer on a Macbeth that they were going to organize. It's a digital lab, theatre lab, and they were looking for dancers, musicians, all sorts of artists to participate in this workship and this laboratory. So I decided to go there because at the time I was researching the limits of theatre. The limits of the theatre within action theatre. So then there was a performance by Carles Santos, the artist and musician, in the 80s in the gallery Mediterrànies. And Carles was playing the piano, and there was a performer who would be there with a hammer and a nail, and he would put the hand on the piano and place the nail and the hammer.
Y aquello me impactó mucho y empecé a cuestionarme sobre la verdad.
So I was really impressed at the time. I was very young, a child at the time, and this made me reflect about the truth and the lies in art, and whether pain was also an artistic material, whether whether it mattered that the performer was actually suffering, or whether this was a fake hand or a true one, or that he had used some sort of anesthesia, or what it was all about. So I decided to go to the lab, but only as an academician. I didn't want to get dirty, let's say. And then I went onto the stage, and I never came down again. I went there to that lab, and it changed my life. This is the first image. This is the first time I went onto stage. It was Macbeth. And this is Montse Triola, the producer, who at the time was an actress. And I need some water.
Y bueno, nos pusieron juntas porque, como veis, éramos muy similares, ¿no?
Pair us up because we, as you can see, we're similar. We were similar in size and so on. And this image is something I've gone back to it because it is a foundational image. I've started studying my work and I realized that there's always this pair. There's 11 as a magical number, and I've also worked with twins. Also worked with twins, and I wanted to know where this was coming from. This pairing, the double, the twin, and so on. How I entered the ritual of the scene, and sometimes I combine both things, different heads, and also this double or this twin. So the impact of theater actually influenced my painting a lot, and my painting became freer, more torn apart and more connected to the theater. And this is a portrait of Ophelia. I was working with Lucio Muñoz. I was doing a workshop, and he came to me and asked, "What monster is that?" And I was like, "Look at that, it's Ophelia, it's not a monster." And Lucio then the next day gave me Kafka's Metamorphosis, and I started reading Kafka, and the monsters have always been present in my theater too, because of the connection with Jim Henson, Villahaki, that were very present in my childhood, during my childhood, but also particularly because of the connection with my culture. We have in my region, in Galicia, a way of embodying these concepts that are related to telluric things, Tellurian things. And here we have a photograph by De La Torre, who's a photographer that participates in rituals that are Tellurian, earthly, and that are related to rituals connected to the carnival. And I have also grown up with this. This is part of my DNA, although sometimes this transforms into something else, something different. After reading Kafka, I also started changing the concept of the head. It was a woman's head, but then it changed
el cuerpo y se hacía de una manera de esencialización, ¿no?
And it was a way of going to the essence, going to the purest form. And this was the last Ophelia I drew, painted. And at a certain moment in my career, I was so much I was really engaged and involved in painting, but I had gotten to know theater, and there was no way back from that. So during 3 months, I spent 3 months painting on my own in my studio after I finished my study, because that was supposed to be what would make me feel the happiest. But then I didn't understand why I was feeling such a vacuum inside me. Then looking at all these different paintings that I had painted, I realized that they were theater, in fact. So I decided to stop painting. My mom stopped talking to me for a whole year, and I decided that I would go for things I ignored. I decided to get merged into this collective work of theater, what the ideas of different artists will generate and create, and in a very ancestral, with a very ancestral approach. During these years, it's been essential for me to go towards spaces like this one, to these encounters. I wanted to share this with you because for me, participating at meetings such as Las Trobades has had an impact in my thought and my work, because in my thinking and my work too, because these are things that have become realities that have changed me a lot. And that's also the reason why I do theatre, with that purpose. And that's a privilege for me. Each project is in fact a life adventure, and it brings to me enormous lessons. It's actual learning. So I went to the Cadix meeting, and I went first to the Fito in Orense, this fair, and the question was, where are women? And theatre from France, from Montbéliard, asked me for a theatre. It was Peugeot's biggest plant in Europe, and I worked on the women in the sector, in the industry of cars, in the automotive industry. And this spectacle, I presented it in France in 2016, and the reaction was a bit of, it was quite aggressive, in fact. It was perceived as something that was too aggressive, as something like Nazism, this Nazi feminism. And then later on I was asked to present it again in Madrid, and I did it with the workers from Citroën from Vigo, and it was in Madrid, and we did it in Madrid, and it was the same show. And then the reception, the reaction from the audience was something like plain, with no character, something too soft. And I thought, well, you know, the context where you present your work, it's actually very important. Sometimes we don't really understand why our work is not well understood or well perceived or correctly understood, because we don't understand that the context is so important. And the fact, in my case, it was what was going on in the streets with the protests about the demands for feminism, because what was going on in the streets had a much greater vibration. It was much more active and strong. And I wanted also to legitimize this softness, because it was my contribution, very much connected with intuition, and I thought I had to continue that path. And sometimes this is a choice that we need to do as artists.
Ultimately, you work in a context, and the context, the background modifies and transforms your work, and sometimes there is nothing you can do to avoid that. Or well, even though you can, the most important thing is to be faithful to your ideas. Another encounter, another meeting I attended was the MIA in Cadiz, the Ibero-American Female Creators meeting. So the first edition was about reimagining creative artistic creation from the edges. So I met a lot of women that worked on the decolonial concept. I had never heard about that concept before. I always had looked towards Central Europe. So Avignon, that would be my mecca. I wanted to be there as an artist, a theater artist. So suddenly I allowed myself to turn around and push the limits, looking towards towards a place that was far apart, far away, where I found works by creators that were working in unprivileged context, whereas I was complaining about, as a European female, that there weren't enough funds in Galicia, in my region, so that made me reconnect with my position. this all this gave way. This is a summer night's dream. This is a production I was creating with transgender people about the freedom of choice, freedom to choose who they want to be. The next production, this is about the skin discourse, this look, or this white perspective, this soft perspective of us. So everything revolved around Desdemona's skin, the actress, voice, I mean, everything was, all characters had the actress's voice. Everything went through her. So, through Desdemona, and that is the perspective I use to speak about privileges and percentages. Alexina B. This is an opera I made about the story of Hercule. Recently at the Liceu Theatre in Barcelona, the first intersexual person, we have some records about with diaries. She writes in the first person. So we have direct records. This connection with magic, with invisible, led me to find I Ching. I feel a bit ashamed to speak about this in public. I was given an I Ching as a present. John Cage were using it. The translation of I Ching is the book on mutation, on mutations. The first texts date back to the 13th century. So when you inquire about a specific situation, you get the response. It's a moral book, and due to its structure, it's a philosophical and cosmogonic book. They speak about, it speaks in terms of continuous and dotted lines, and I took each I Ching to get to more unexpected places. I didn't let my intellect, my rationality lead me everywhere. I didn't want them to guide my art. I wanted to find ways to reconnect with my intuition, with my physicality. So the more I advanced and evolved in my professional career, the more disconnected I felt with my body. I wanted to go back to the unknown. So I set traces and frameworks to bring about the unexpected. So as a result, we decided to work on an opera about Cicciolina, this female Italian figure, and we even met her because I asked the I Ching what would be the impact of communicating with Cicciolina, and the I Ching said, so the juvenile ignorance. So it will be so I give reason to the first oracle. So if you ask 2-3 times, it can be a nuisance. So it was obvious that we only had one chance to ask. So we knocked on her home's work, on her house's door. Here's the team, the producer, etc. And that gave rise to this show, Amnesia, Cleo's Amnesia, this muse. On this scene, we have the Trojan horse. And this character that represents Cicciolina, she enters the Oval Office, and I thought about what possible Trojan horse we could make, not a literal white horse, but a different one. So my libretto writer wanted to see an exhibition in the museum in El Prado, a museum, and he discovered that picture. So Artemisia discovers finds her rapers in the faces of those old men, and there is a group of women that enters the Oval Office. And the last meeting I want to tell you about, EMIAE, around cauldron contemporary practices. So I was invited to speak about my relationship with the I Ching. It was the first time I found a safe context or environment to give legitimacy to this way of working that connects with the ancestral. So I cannot tell you the exact source, but every artist aspires to kill his father, and the female artist wants to, find her grandmother to find a re-encounter with her grandmother. So I went to the Atitlán Lake in America, and I got in contact with shamanism through local artist shamanism, and I went through a hole, a threshold, and suddenly I became more aware that about the right of theater. Every night, through shapes, through forms, we can convey messages and transform attendants, the viewers, those of you sitting there in the back. But this is part of something much greater. We've talked about this a lot for these 2 days. So I'm starting to build bridges, to open up cracks, so that I can occupy those crevices, those cracks. So this is a show on Galician tradition. It speaks about my granny, my grandmother. So I used the regional costumes with those petticoats. The walls of the theater break down completely, and suddenly different museums started to call me to commission works. And I was completely, surprised. I chose, at that moment of my life, I decided to close the door, but everything makes sense. All the parts are, included in that self, that is me. And all those parts, I'm made up of all those parts. This is an installation on megas, on witches. I used a lot of figs. And the theater is full of those shapes. This theater is called Campo de Figos, so it's a fig tree orchard. It's a play on words. With these turnip fields. So when the lights get off, your shade, your shadow is projected, so that you are in contact with power. This is the Galician Center for Contemporary Art. So I got in contact with this concept of witchcraft, César Vieira's architecture too. So this show, as you can see, we are always building up bridges, connections with that which is invisible. This play is on Sappho. We presented it at the Mérida Theatre Festival. This was a tribute, a homage to Jean-Claude. He's always been known as Cristo. Jean-Claude and Cristo. So that was a way about speaking about Sappho. We are always there, even though we are not seen. We've been neglected. Sappho was neglected for 27 centuries and brought back to life in our times. So that was a dialogue I decided to create. And theater is to me a place where I feel really happy. It's connected to gold, to the aureole. So it's been a privilege to share my thoughts with you about this aureus concept. And that is all on my part. Thank you.
Gracias.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Magnifique.
Hola. This is the first and last Spanish word you will hear from me. Sorry. I just want to start by to thank the team of the meeting, especially Sandra, but everyone for the great few days we are spending here. Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor and privilege to be with such a great company of scholars, artists, intellectuals. I learned a lot, and yeah, I'm happy to be here. When I was invited to speak at this panel under the phrase of Camus, the sentence, I mean, a theater stage is one of the places in the world where I am happy. I found myself immediately leaning towards rephrasing the sentence to make it the title of my work. So for me, the phrase will read like this: theater stage is one place where I feel restless. But also it's one of the very few, very rare places in the world where I still can contemplate about hope and its many evasive meanings. In the last couple of years, I have been generally occupied with three themes. The first one is justice and what it means beyond its legal definitions, more as ethics and practices. The second theme is writing of history or the battle of narratives in times of war and great upheavals, while the third theme is hope. And while I think that I can work to connect the first two themes with theater as I understand it, space to ask controversial questions and an act of political and social resilience, the third theme, which is hope, and because it is the most urgent act of resilience for me today, I'm still feeling my way around it. And this actually leaves me personally with an agonizing question. How did I begin with a dream of theater as tool for tangible social and political change, and arrive to the dream of theater as a creator of space, no matter how small, for hope? Some stops along the way of doing theater will maybe illustrate this. And I will ask you kindly to accompany me in recalling some of these moments through my journey of making theater that started around 20 years ago. When I decided to study theater in Damascus in 2002, I was convinced that it could make a hole in the terrible kingdom of fear I was born into it, which we knew as Assad Syria, or Syria of Assad. I have to admit that my passion for theater as rehearsal, as a stage, scenography, actors would come later. My first practical experience in theater when I was still a student took me to the remote countryside in Syria. The project was based on the techniques of the Brazilian theater director and theorist Augusto Boal, Theater of the Oppressed, and especially his forum theater that brought theater makers to marginalized villages to practice theater with the locals. So we take theater to the locals instead of the locals come to the theater. Boal and the Theater of the Oppressed was exactly what I was looking for to confirm my conviction that theater had the potential for social. This is not Boal, by the way. This is will come late. Boal and the Theater of the Oppressed was exactly what I was looking for to confirm my conviction that theater had the potential for social and even political change in the lives of both the makers and the recipients. Did we bring about any change through this project and other like it when we work with the people in these communities? I can humbly answer yes. Yet this yes reflects how my understanding of the change that is possible through theater has itself changed over time. Paradoxically, the more I have worked, the more I have discovered the limits of change through theater. In 2008, we spent 3 months working with a group of prisoners inside the juvenile prison of Damascus. to devise a theater piece with them. Never before a theater group been allowed to enter a prison and work with inmates in Syria. When I look back, I credit the prison as the place where I came to better understand Syria. Through the play, 8 characters, I learned how the cycles of poverty and marginalization form a closed ring, with those born inside never able to escape. Therefore, the play I did with them planted many doubts about the utility of theater, of my theater. In the months following the show, I tried to stay in touch with its protagonists. Some were briefly released from jail, only to return for a small theft or on mere suspicion. The ring was sealed around their neck, and the theatrical performance was a fleeting memory amid very hard living. Yet, whenever I'm invaded by discomfort or a sense of uselessness around this experience, I return to the words of Khudr, one of the protagonists, who in our last meetings outside the prison in Syria, he told me the following. Well, we sure had our fair share of fun and laughs during the rehearsals. You know, the show gave us some hope. Khudr's words left me with many thoughts about the meaning of hope in a similar context. It was not a coincidence that my last meeting with him, Khudr, came shortly before the outbreak of the Syrian revolution in March 2011. The Syrian revolution is a popular uprising that stood up against one of the most brutal dynasties in the modern era, the Assad dynasty. During the early months of the uprising, we had plenty of hope, a legitimate hope, in my opinion, that we created in the streets all over Syria while chanting for freedom, dignity, and social justice. Tragically, this hope didn't last long in Syria, as the country will soon enter a dark phase of bloody proxy war, that its chapters are still unfolding till this moment. Along this ongoing tragic war, my journey of making theater was, and still, surrounded by questions and restlessness. In the summer of 2013, I was fortunate to be hosted by a group of young men to run a theater workshop in a small city called Kafrembel in the northwestern part of Syria, in the Idlib province, where the earthquake hit hard recently. The war was, back then in 2013, in the summer 2013, the war was at its peak there. The Syrian regime forces were being forced to retreat, and they reacted with an ongoing bombardment to keep the areas outside their control under terror. My hosts wanted to learn theater techniques that they could use in their work with the children and teenagers whose homes had been destroyed and who were now living in shelters with their families. Why did I say I was fortunate to do this workshop? Because I was able to spend time with young people who worked more than they talked and who practiced theoretical concepts I had only encountered in books. They were able to organize, to utilize whatever resources they had on hand without dependency on a donor, all in democratic, non-hierarchical, participatory, lively environment. None of them formed or was part of any political organization, and none of them labeled themselves as leftists. Most had no higher education even. Before this experience, I was on the verge of despair, caught between the massacres of the Assad regime and the rise of the Islamic jihadists. Those days in this town, Kafrembel, restored my confidence in Syria's popular uprising, democratic uprising, which had been swept by the loud sound of war. During the time I spent there, it was clear to me that I was the one who is doing or learning the most. And amid the news of the battlefront, I was racked by restlessness about, again, the use of what we are doing, the use of theater in this context. But night after night, their enthusiasm silenced my doubts. One night, before I leave this town, shortly before I leave, after we finish our rehearsal, and it was another night without electricity, there is no power, there is no electricity during the night, Khalid, one of the participants, he told me, let's go for a walk in the nearby fields. Enveloped by the light of the full moon that night, we crossed into the fig and olives groves that surround Kafrembil as far as the eye can see. Khalid showed me his hiding spots where he spent days in these fields hiding while the regime forces attacked the city and they were searching for activists. The stillness of that night was penetrated by the sound of two distant shells, a trivial noise on that beautiful night. I asked Khalid while walking, why would you all want to engage in a theater workshop with me? He replied, I'm not exactly sure, but when I think about the exercises and games you are sharing with us, and I imagine repeating them with the children I work with, I sense they might catch a break from the bleakness of their situation, or at least be given some hope that their story will be told or recorded, that someone might hear them. Once again, Khalid's words, like those of Khudr before him, left me with some hope. He picked some figs from the nearby tree and told me it was okay to eat it without washing it because it's only watered from the rain. We continue our work in the fields. In summer of 2016, almost 3 years later, Khalid would be assassinated by an explosive device planted by the extremist jihadist. He was 24 years old. A few months later, 2 other participants in this workshop were killed in a Syrian regime airstrike. In winter 2014 in Beirut, now I will show some photos while I speak, if you don't mind, so we can show photos from Antigone, the play Antigone. In winter 2014 in Beirut, while working on the play Antigone with Syrian refugee women who've never been on theater before, never entered theater before, and who lived with their families in miserable camps in the Lebanese capital. I struggled to answer the question posed by most of the women before we started the rehearsals. Their question was, of what use is theater today when we lack basic life necessities? Entering the open rehearsal space days before we started the project, the echo of that question left me again with an unbearable feeling of restlessness. However, during 3 months of working together, I think we managed to discover some answers for this question. We discovered through their challenging of male authority, their reclamation of the narrative of the Syrian tragedy, their growing confidence in themselves, their voices, and their bodies, and their grappling with the racism they had faced in society dominated by rigid hierarchical class system. After the premiere, Wafa, one of the women you saw the picture now, she approached me, pointing to a group of elegantly dressed women standing outside the theater. Wafa told me, while pointing to the women, they used to see me as another cleaner of their home, but now they lavish me with praise for my stage presence. I asked her, like I wanted to make a joke with her. I asked her, but what about the other women who didn't see you on stage? She responded with a smile. She said, I don't care about that anymore. What matters now is how I see myself. In 2018, we can move to the play The Factory, please. Yeah. In 2018, while I was in the midst of preparing, researching for the play The Factory, the play is about the scandal involving the French giant cement corporation Lafarge in Syria. Mohammad, a worker at that factory who had suffered a lot from the management's mistreatment and neglect, he agreed to speak to me after much hesitation. I asked him why he had changed his mind finally. He told me that even though he couldn't do much against such a giant multinational corporation that had joint interests with governments of major powers, nevertheless, he wanted them to stand trial through the play. I had to explain to him, that the play does not revolve around a trial specifically or concretely, nor it will be a substitute for a real trial. So I had to be very clear and honest with him. Nevertheless, Mohammad was still willing to tell me his story. Once again, I entered the rehearsal with this massive doubts about the value and the relevance of this play, while feeling a heavy burden on my shoulders from the stories that were told to me from many people whose life got severely affected by this case of Lafarge. Several months later, after we had the premiere and the play was touring, Mohammad, the worker who told me his story, attended a performance of the play while in Athens, while he was stuck as a refugee there. I received a short text message from him saying, "Yes, your play is not a trial, but it's my first step to seek justice." We'll move to the last one, to the play Damascus 2045, the name of the title of the play. In 2021, following the first read through the play Damascus 2045 at the Theater Freiburg, South Germany, a city in South Germany, where it was staged. Holger, this is Holger, one of the veteran actors of the German ensemble, he asked me, "What do you really want from theater today?" Simple question, huh? But his question actually caught me by surprise. So I pointed him to the ending of the play, of the text, which actually leaves the story open to possibilities. I admitted to him and the rest of the actors that the ending was as much about wanting to leave the door open for the protagonist as it was about my inability to devise a clear conclusion. On the one hand, I want to resist the deep pessimism that arises in facing the current reality of Syria and the whole Middle East. But on the other hand, I do not wish to surrender to false optimism and illusion. Albert Camus once said, "It was in Spain that my generation learned that one can be right and yet be beaten, that force can vanquish spirit, that there are times when courage is not its own recompense." It is this, doubtless, which explains why so many the world over feel the Spanish drama as their personal tragedy. In my opinions, no better words than Camus' words can describe how Syrians feel about the struggle in Syria today. And along with them, I think millions of young people across the Arab world, Arab region, where they fought bravely against brutal dictatorships and oligarchs, from Tunis to Egypt, to Libya, to Yemen, to Sudan, and elsewhere, in what was known as the Arab Spring. Only after all this, to find themselves today either in countries torn by wars or led again by authoritarian regimes. Let's be honest, today the reality for us in Syria and across the Arab region is bleak. So how come all this unbelievable creativity, beauty, tremendous courage, and sacrifices that we witnessed across the revolting cities in the Arab region ended up with such a horrible defeat? How and why I still do theater, thinking that it's still of any value or meaning amid this absurd and inhumane conditions? How do we tell a story about the unimaginable that actually happened, about the inconceivable that did take place? In brief words, how do I write about Syria? I honestly don't have clear answers. All I know is there still lives some hope, little bit of hope, inside my head. It's not a permanent resident, disappearing and reappearing. But when it does reemerge, I know it's not the illusional mirage, but something real that keeps me and others alive. Resisting falling in the deep hole of despair, though we make home on its edge. Theater helps me find hope. More than ever before, I understand that resisting despair is fundamentally a political act. Can we invent hope through theater and art? I cannot be sure, but I know that we are trying. Thank you very much. شكرا Driss. No, please.
Bonjour.
Hello.
Évidemment, je ne pourrais pas commencer ma présentation.
I may not start my presentation without first thanking Miguel, Sandra, the whole Trobades team, as well as this marvelous event that, in my view, and I'd like to say something about this that for me is essential. This event is truly different. It's something different. It's not based on specific defined topics, but just words that resonate within us and invite us to travel, to let us shift, drift. The event is so well organized and designed that this brings me to mind that what an expert in suffering at work said, that taking care of one's work is taking care of oneself and healing oneself. So this is something absolutely precious. So thanks again for this, for the Trobades. The theatre, a theatre stage, is one of the places in the world where I am happy. When I discovered this sentence by Camus, I also felt I could say these words in a very spontaneous way. And a very friend of mine chose these words for my last play that is going to appear next month, the National Agenda. It's an allegory of industrialization, and these words were chosen by a critic that is a friend of mine. So feeling happy is something different than feeling happy in the theater. So why does this sentence by Camus resonate so much to me? These words, one of the places in the world is the embodiment of an utopia. an utopia, which is a different place, a third place. And before I go into the detail of this specific place, I would like to suggest a journey on the basis of some of my recollections. When I try to remember what I have enjoyed most in theatre since I started going on to stage, was a beautiful image linked to a feeling. Also the recent experience of a laboratory, and also something, a link that is unexpected. Once again, this link, this bond. So the image is that of my uncle, Nabil Khem, who was also an expert in theatre, also an actor, a director, playwright. And who, over 10 years ago, he brought to theatre the Fall by Camus. And I'm thinking about this image because my grandmother, who was a wonderful woman with a bohemian heart, called him Nebi, prophet. This is, Nebi is his whole name. The prophet slave. And I was always expecting the arrival of Nebi, my grandfather. And this revolted me, and he represented everything that I admired on the stage, in the mosque, at the mosque, and at school. We talked twice about this prophet that was someone that was very far away, but I felt my grandfather, who was the prophet and was so close to me. And I always keep very precisely
à mon neveu Driss, qui deviendra un jour écrivain de Ces quelques lignes sonnent encore dans mon esprit comme
what he wrote for me in 1987 about this dedication that he wrote to me before he died, saying that I was going to become a great man of the theatre. And well, this saved me from a self-depreciation. I went to the theatre every evening, and at the university theatre I could see Rashim Shukhat acting in such incredible way with emotions, and I just loved this incredible rage that could only be expressed in such a place. While the political scene was quite serious at the time. I just loved this place, familiar and foreign at the same time, where we could talk about politics on the stage. And this black box, like here today, black box in English refers to the theatre, and also it refers to the female sex. And for me, this was a third-party place, and also a place of pleasure. And I go back to a second recollection. In 1999, we prepared on a piece on the information on the theatre. So I had to write every month a piece of work on how to work with theatre with the citizens, and we had to present the fruit of our creativity in order to set up a theatre that would last 40 minutes with audiences that would come with us for 3 years. And at the beginning there was a great enthusiasm by Aristophane, who considered the theatre as a place of controversy, and Dostoevsky could also have a resonate there. And these theatre plays that were built on the news would show what was going on in the world or in our city. something like life scenes that would be apprehended and owned by us. There was a waiting line in front of a civil servant that was absent, and there each of those citizens was a human being but waiting for a stamp to be planted on them. Or three women that are discussing about their private suffering under burqas, and all this was shown to the audience. It was true and very troubling at the same time. So this plays of what was going on in the world were shown on a stage, and this reminded some Strasbourg Welsh, a group of musicians and poets that are still alive in the Atlas, where two poets discuss on the background of music, and they will discuss the topic of current interest. They will refer to the Hiraf in the Rift, for example. So it's a sort of a battle in an abandoned garage, and this is augmented by the theatre, and the audience is invited to accept their social and political condition through the characters that give them this death. When I'm thinking about the moment when we feel the happiest in a theatre, and as a playwright like Camus, I can only think of my own experience. And then I realized that there are two specific moments, very differently exciting. First of all, the rehearsals. So we have a written text, and we want it to become oral. Orality has to be there with the appropriate rhythms, paces. And this is one of the few moments where we see the performance taking place. And we have this expression of performance by Trobades and Chesner, who realized that in every culture, through rituals, and not only on stage, human beings have always been recreating themselves, changing themselves, and turning into what they are not. And that's the origin of this word performance. And it is a moment, an isolated moment out of our daily lives. And when we have the right tone, and the appropriate experience and a strong voice, it is absolutely marvelous. Then we have the representations themselves, the premiere particularly, but also others where we meet the audience and we go beyond the stereotypes of temple. We see that the theatre can become a place of a unique, singular experimentation. We have the lights, the bodies, the tension of the relationships. And we see that theatre is above all energy. The theatre is not composed of lights that will make you close your eyes, but it's in fact a moment isolated from the accelerated world in which we live. This idea of getting people out of their very comfortable homes and make them come to the theatre to stop, or in an open space, just to enjoy the beauty or an emotion, and this is why theatre is so will bring you so many experiences. In Rabat, we met associations working with sub-Saharan migrants, and the audience was appreciating the theatre play by Soulian. It was a poetic reflection on the conditions of a migrant that was frozen under a plane. And I saw the reaction from the people in the audience, their humanity was fragmented at expressed. We always have this feeling of something exotic that deserves a round of applause. A theater is one of those places where you can break the walls, where stereotypes, religions, and classes have been created to classify and categorize human beings. We can refer to those who are at the border of a world and want to transform it and make him become better, at least slightly. And that is the case, as Michel Cochet said, this is part of the relationships in which it can be an intermediary, an interpreter between contradictory things. You can listen and also speak and place oneself at the crossroads of different positions. So it is there that we become, in fact, conveyors, because we can release voices that are often not heard. And here I'm not talking about mediator, but conveyor. The conveyor would want to open up doors to what is beyond us, what is ignored up to that moment. And we try to fight against the silence that is imposed. We want to make sure that we can make the narrative emerge, re-establish the relationships between the districts, in the physical spaces that are inhabited by culture, by imaginaries, the commercialization of the world inhabited by avatars, where the spectators have led to the mass entertainment that just make us more stupid. And this is why theatre that allows to fight against all this makes me feel happy. The theatre stage is one of the places in the world, and it is linked to this utopia. In the text, in one of the lectures by Michel Foucault, on the spaces that are different, he defined utopias by several principles. He talks about prisons, about cemeteries, about psychiatric hospitals, but in the third principle he refers to the theatre as a place of dramatic and filmic representation. Heterotopia has the power of representing several places in a physical space, different things that are incompatible in between them. So the theatre can bring together several places that are foreign, mutually foreign. So this is why cinema is a very curious place where we have a screen that is 2D, but where we can represent a 3D space. So here we have these very old example of this. It's the garden, and he refers to a garden, not a courtyard, and also to a ship. In his lecture and his books, he refers to heterotopy as somewhere where there are unusual places that allow us to break the established social order, not only through violence, but also through hope and laughter. Foucault will help us understand that the theatre makes us happy, also Camus, and starting from the utopia as a non-existing place, Paul Ricoeur refers to the practical aspect of it, because it can be realized, because it refers to the current social essence. Ideology is the system to control consent, and utopia, heterotopia in fact, allows us to reveal through the imaginary other things and build and fight against prevailing discourses and the order of the orders. This allowed me to think about the different duality, discipline and indiscipline. This brings me to this attitude of the rebel in the work, in Camus' work. Nietzsche also finds a different innocence, naivety, and on the basis of different categories of knowledge, and also referring to the conformity of this spirit of the sheep. And here I want to refer to the free artist who's lonely, but who can pollinate and encourage creations, and that can lead to revealing hidden narratives. The writer and the thinker that will cross different silos to bring up sensibilities and become conveyors that can bring up territories and imaginaries. The main driver that will believe above all in the need of change and transformation. This is the absolute need to humanize them, because they are aware of the fact that humanity is something that is deserved every minute, and it requires a constant questioning. And this is where I find Albert Camus. And to rework on our humanity, at least at a small scale, and rename. This is a word that I really enjoy. Ogunlo writes about the decolonization of spirits, and he says remembering. So this means to remember in English, but also this also refers to renaming something that is dislocated. And it is this double gesture of memory and renaming that allows us to constantly mend humanity at the small scale. And therefore, we've got disseminators of the otherness that irrigate in it. We're not talking about people that will work advocating for a positive moralism like Sartre. They're not stupidly optimistic either. Most of the writers and thinkers know that there are gaps between those who are for disseminating hatred and those who are shocked by the fear. Also, the difference to the previous ones, they don't just think about what they can reduce. They try to work in the spaces of the margins, and the theater is a place that allows us to go into a gap in the theater. So this allows us for information and reflection, hoping that the place of life will breathe differently. The lack of discipline is not in the right moment. So this way of approaching art is a pretext for communion. It is the way we can be marveled. And this opens up to everything that is possible and not the paradoxes. I'm not sure that I would be happy in all theaters and all art places, and particularly not in stratified museums and not in theaters where practices have been fixed. This is why it's interesting to go to those alternative theaters, as they are referred to, in favor of an emergence of a different thinking. When Sofiane and Selma Louisin created in Tunisia in 2017 a festival that was called Dream City with theatre and other creative and visual arts, they refer to the conquering of public space by a totalitarian system, and therefore the art should be resisting. And they were creating spaces that would lead to what happened in 2011. And they expressed this need to reinvent public spaces and how artists were invited to arrive, forgetting all their previous projects, and enjoy the interactions of the citizens in the Medina. They were not the initiators, but they wanted to provoke a form of release of the spirits. So, reflecting on this, on the basis of Camus' sentence, for me, the theatre is where we can learn discipline and the lack of discipline. Being rigorous and being not respecting laws. Also, work with the rhythm of the words and show gestures, but we can do it in a passionate way to express rage and find links to a world that may be alien. But nothing can be expressed with some degree of art, with a certain way of doing. The theatre offers us a different point of view on what is political. And we do it thanks to the rehearsals. And this is why probably the people of theatre, not everyone, but people of theatre in general, have a very high idea of democracy. And why? Because this practice of rehearsal, of working on text, constantly working on them, makes you aware of the relationship and the engagement of the different individuals, the vibration of some that will have an impact on what others do. And this will give place to what is different, to what is beyond us, with the goal of building a common and shared build, something that is not going to last, a need of freedom, of imaginary, looking always for a common sense. Most who are dedicated to theatre always find an ethical sense to democracy. For them, the acceptance of what is non-permanent, the uncertainty in taking risks, and everything that implies the creation of a community. And the people of the theatre as citizens can often feel disappointed. Sometimes bringing their sarcasm on the stage may contribute to the industry of entertainment, but it is different when they get together to offer critical thinking. And going back to the stage, this is one of the few places where we can say what cannot be said, using a language that will be touching those that are most sensitive. And theatre will also include other performing arts, with the goal of giving to others their humanity. The dramatic art has the privilege of the purity and the impunity that is necessary to address truth, the truth. The religion always goes away from that. And the theatre allows us to show what we cannot look directly. We have all understood that. With what I shared with you today, I just wanted to add a nuance to Camus' sentence. And if happiness that was given to me by the theatre was in fact something linked to this, the fact that I can say what is not allowed to be said. And of course, not all theatres are there, but some are daring enough and courageous enough to be heterogeneous, offer different possibilities to their citizens.
Shukran, Driss.
What are we supposed to do?
Which language are we speaking? French.
Maybe let's talk English, because the three of us, maybe.
No.
No,
español. Speak Spanish. Speak Spanish, please.
Sí.
No. Vous en francés o en inglés.
You can speak in French, English, and Spanish because we have interpreters. I can more or less talk Spanish, but so I'll stick to that. So you can speak any language, your language of choice, but do speak.
Peut-être je peux poser une question.
Well, I would like to ask a question, if I'm allowed.
J'ai vu l'esthétique à partir de laquelle tu travailles.
I've seen the aesthetics you are, based on. So it's like a gap in the building up of images which allow outside mimesis, they give rise to something else. How can you explain your way of tackling your aesthetics? What is the main concern underlying, the surface? There is both ethical and aesthetical concerns. Could you elaborate on how you build up all those, all that process? Yeah, even though it seems controversial, the relationship between form and content has always been a controversial topic on a stage. So that's what I suffered at the beginning of my career. Form is really powerful, but, content dissolves. It's not so. But to me, they are inseparable. And the way, the form you use to construct, to build, they are both inseparable. Maybe I used a lot the concept of ecofeminism. I always worked with trying to care for others. So that was the main angle in my life, because my mother used to be a nurse. So I paid special attention to rhythm, to momentum, to time when connecting with the audience, but also during rehearsals or my everyday work. Rigor, as you mentioned, Kirk. We need rigor to be able to tell our stories, a technique. So, this non-separation, this indissolubility of both parts, this understanding that any artistic process is a living organism, is something that is alive and evolving, and this goes hand in hand with the evolution of feminism. So this helped me understand myself, because it used to be to me, images arise in my mind, in my head, so the choices I make from proposals that come from outside, that is the process I follow. So in any project, I hate to read theatre. I hate it. So I invite friends, we open some bottles of wine at home, I close my eyes, and they are the ones that read aloud for me. So images emerge in my mind. When new images emerge in my mind, that means that the process is okay. I also come from painting, from visual arts, so there is a concern to find a balance, as in any living organism. Form cannot prevail or override the content, and the other way around. So that is what I've learned. In any experience, there is a constant concern about the how and the what. As Antonio Muñoz Molina very rightly pointed out yesterday, nobody can speak about freedom or change and transformation if in our companies, if in our working centers, in our processes, we are not applying this way of working. So the form has to be there if we want to care for society, if we want to transform society. We need to start by transforming, changing our working centers, working areas from the very bottom. So, color. This color, this light, this bright light needs to permeate our working spaces in deep relationship with vitality. Color and vitality go hand in hand. When I became aware about my identity through color, color is like water, it flows, it finds all cracks and it can permeate everything. So we start with black, but even though you start with the black, it transforms. It converts, as you said. I came dressed in black, but this is my T-shirt, and I find this fascinating. Theater, what we do, the subject matter, what we do, flows like water, so it finds crevices, and of course, it finds a way in our minds to find new ways of telling about life, new dramaturgies. Wait a sec, please.
Sí, tengo esta indisciplina que me hace
I'm not rigorous. I'm sorry because I constantly have the urge to give my own opinion, but that is the way I am and I cannot avoid it. It's been an absolute delight, a pleasure to hear you three. Of course, I followed Marta for a long time. So in this topic about hope, those community, collective processes with people that are not professional actors in Syria and in other places, that led me to think about this experience. I would like to present to here and the topic that emerges, that every now and then in our meetings, in our Trobades I've attended. So we tend to discuss about many topics and things, but as we said yesterday, Pompidou is not visited by Afro-descendants nor immigrants, usually white, there are not even people from Menorca in our Trobades. So what could we do? Yeah. Good.
Claro.
Yeah, bueno, sure.
Yo me refería para que son de Sant Lluís y de Sant Lluís he vist
poca gent. In Sant Lluís, I didn't see many people from Sant Lluís, from this very town. So we need to open up spaces to attract people, locals. so that they feel, they belong. Sorry, I'm mistaken. So if there are many people for Saint Driss, I beg your pardon. But anyway, maybe we could organize one day on the main square of Saint Driss, of the town, just to, so that, and there were Afro-descendant artists that were speaking exactly about that. There were no immigrants in the sessions, no people of migrant origin. So can we, disseminate hope on stage among the audience, members of the audience, so that we can reach, and transmit that message?
Esa pregunta la tenemos siempre en
we
la cabeza.
always
De hecho,
have that in mind. So, your proposal about organizing a session in this main square, we have interpreters. Technically speaking, I mean, it's a great challenge because we are working with 4 different languages and we have to interpret everything on an outdoor space. But as said, there is this need of transfer, and this is at the core of our reflections, of our thoughts, at least for us as a team. So, of course, Saint Driss is making a great effort, but I'm sorry, but the audience is what they are. They are not willing or not, they don't feel like attending. So there are many people living on the edge, and of course, this small project, I think it has accomplished a lot, and some other things were impossible. If you allow me, beyond that, beyond what is going on today here on this specific context, we have the impression that we're afraid of inhabiting a place where there won't be enough spaces or places. So parallel to that, we have that concern about transmission, about conveying, about explaining the relevance, first of all, of taking into account those that are with us, those who we coexist with. So yesterday, we have the impression that apart from genius, for being genius, we are really good, we are very good speakers. Not at all. We need to also be listening to others. So, and we need to get into in schools. Yesterday, Vinebin told us what he was trying to do in Marrakesh. So our main attempt is to change the paradigm and work with audiences, not only as the receivers, but also as those that have a lot of knowledge to share. They can also become creators. So we have to establish that two-way communication, those communication channels with other stakeholders. So here we have this problem in Europe. It is certainly the case here, but it's even more serious in my country, because anybody that organizes an event, they cannot do everything at the same time. And maybe we need to divide tasks and distribute tasks so that people ask as intermediaries, as interfaces, so that risk-taking is shared, so that the people can and transfer and give voice to their ideas. But with that, we need to neglect that attitude as the one that knows and become ignorancers, because all of us, carry with us an imaginary, but that requires a lot of time, effort, and we are not so used to that. So we have to bring about the special environment. We need to infiltrate in schools, and this is a long battle, a long war we need to wage. that is at the core of, this is the essence of the problem. We need to promote and foster new environments. Of course, we need to find a meeting point, but this is the only visible way of moving forward. So we need a lot of work, of efforts, and this would force us to change many, many things and to adapt, of course, be flexible.
Sorry, I just want to add something, because I think your question is very important, but I can speak about theaters and spaces. From my observation, usually the failures is that there is no, two things. There is no constant questioning of the process, because the intentions are always good or there, like to build something inclusive, yeah? This is one thing. So we do the thing and then we really stop to continue about this questioning. And the other thing is, I think we need to deconstruct on a deeper level on the this kind of hierarchical class thing. And two things, because I'll just give an example. Yeah, I live in Berlin now, in a neighborhood of migrants. It's called Neukölln. So historically, this is a neighborhood of Turkish, Arabic migrants, people from all over the world, you know. And there's a theater who was built to kind of build bridges with the migrants. Whenever I go to the theater, I see white middle class in the attendees, even though the repertoire of the theater is still trying to address the issues that concern the migrants or the people of this neighborhood, even though that some curators or directors and actors are people of color. And for me, the thing is because there is no comprehensive deconstruction of this barriers or obstacles, yeah? Because you need to think about education, about socio-political factors, not just about what you present in the theater, yeah? And because we have countless examples of people from migrant backgrounds or people of color who became programmers, but they become, and sorry for my maybe not politically correct, they became more white than the white, yeah? Because change cannot be imposed from above. So if you appoint a curator who's Black or who's Syrian, I don't think this is enough. Yeah, I think that's why I speak about comprehensive deconstruction that include many things, not just the artistic or not just the program or repertoire.
I would like to congratulate Driss, Marta, and Mohammad for their contributions in this wonderful theater and the lessons you gave us about your work on theater. I would like to thank you on behalf of Menorca, and especially I would like to thank the organizing team for these Trobades, for this marvelous gift they prepared from the island of Menorca. So we feel really grateful, and it's been, we feel really proud to be part of this movement with this beautiful slogan, no? The places of the world. And of course, I come from Menorcan people. My surnames, both two surnames, are from Menorca. One of my great-grandmothers was called Macarena Cardona, and she was born in San Luis. Thank you all. First of all, to our speakers, our three speakers, for conveying that energy of theater spaces, this double gesture, as Driss pointed out, of recalling, of recollections, and assembling those two factors that are very much present in your work. And again, thanks for attending, for contributing in this last session of the morning, the second day, around this slogan, the places of the world. And with this, we are closing the edition of 2023. This is not the end. We are finished for the moment here in San Luis, but at 5, a boat will be waiting for you at Maús port, where we will be sailing to the the islands of the Illa del Rey, the King's Island, for the closing ceremony by Alfonso Armada, and after that there was a solo by dancer Israel Galvan. Before I thank our faithful audience that comes from San Luis and from elsewhere, I would like to thank our interpreters that have been working with us for these 3 years: Francisco Merina, Frederic Rovira, Susana Guardiala, Cristina Maidagan, Violeta Parra, and Viviana, and our sound technician, acoustic, that provided support, audiovisual support, Santi Rafael, and all the rest. And of course, I will say the names of all the members of our team in the evening. As I said, please be at the port shortly before 5. Okay, the boat will be department at 5 sharp, so be there some minutes before, and we'll reconvene at the Isla del Rey at 6 o'clock. Thank you.